Okay, let's unpack this. One of the details that immediately jumps out when you consider the timeline in the Delphi case is this. Richard Allen arrived at the Monon High Bridge after Libby and Abby had decided to go. But crucially, before they actually got there. What does that suggest to you?
Well, it immediately raises the possibility that this wasn't just some random terrible encounter, doesn't it?
Right.
That specific timing. It points either to a really disturbing level of pre-planning on Alan's part, maybe a very unsettling coincidence, or even could it be some prior knowledge of the girls' plans that day?
Yeah, it makes you wonder about the intent right
Ah,
from the start.
the level of intent involved.
And that chilling question is really at the heart of what we're diving into today. We're not just going to rehash the known facts of this awful tragedy. Instead, we're looking through the lens of K. Brad Barfield's reflections. He offers some really insightful perspectives on the story of Abby and Libby, these two young girls whose lives were just tragically cut short way too soon.
Barfield's writing, yeah, it gives us a way to look beyond just the what happened, the crime itself, and sort of consider the deeper currents, the why it might have happened, maybe, and what the broader implications are.
For the community, definitely. And maybe for all of us.
Yeah, for their community and perhaps beyond, he really digs into the subtle details, the things that often get lost in, the initial news cycle.
Right. So your insights into Barfield's pieces are going to help us move past that surface narrative. We want to really explore the different layers here, hopefully uncover some of those aha moments that help us get a better handle on it without, drowning in information.
Precisely. And there's a lot to consider. We need to think about the role the bridge itself played. That's huge in Barfield's view. Then there's the unsettling possibility of more than one predator being involved, the disturbingly ordinary nature of the man who was convicted, and some really complex psychological angles that Barfield brings up.
Okay, let's start with the bridge then.
Yeah.
Because Barfield really emphasizes it was more than just a location, right? It seems to have this almost symbolic weight in the story.
Absolutely. The Moon and High Bridge, the way Barfield portrays it, it's almost like a character in itself. For Libby and Abby, it was familiar, a place that held, beauty, but also a bit of adventure.
The youthful edge?
Right. They'd likely been there before, felt that independence, that little thrill of harmless risk-taking that kids seek out.
It's that classic picture of being young, isn't it? Exploring, feeling free. But as Barfield points out, that familiar spot took on a much, much darker meaning that day.
Yeah, symbolically, you could see the bridge as representing that really fragile line, the transition from childhood safety, innocence, into something harsher, fear, loss.
And physically.
And physically, tragically, it became a kind of trap. That's the word Barfield uses. And it's stark but accurate.
Because it's high, narrow.
High, narrow path, no easy way off. It effectively funneled the girls, made them incredibly vulnerable, caught.
It really does capture that feeling. And even now, years later, the bridge is still this central, almost haunting landmark. People still visit, leave memorials. It's just permanently etched into the community's memory of that awful day.
And what's so striking is how a place that was probably associated with, youthful freedom and just having fun has become so completely saturated with sorrow and this deep sense of what was stolen there.
It's a constant reminder, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right there in plain sight. How quickly safety can just evaporate, even in places you think you know.
Exactly, even in the most familiar settings.
Now, Barfield also brings up this really unsettling idea. The possibility that there might have been more than one predator involved. We know about Richard Allen, of course, and his conviction.
That's right. Richard Allen's presence there, the recording, the bullet. That's undeniable evidence linking him, leading to the conviction.
But then you layer in Kegan Kline and the Anthony Shots Instagram account. That just adds this whole other dimension of, horror.
It really does. And what's particularly chilling is the timing of Kline's digital interactions with Libby.
Yeah.
He was communicating with her online, posing as this attractive young guy, literally within hours of her going to the bridge. That kind of grooming, that digital manipulation, it's a tactic we unfortunately see way too often.
And it's that closeness in time that's just so deeply disturbing. Barfield highlights it, suggesting it probably wasn't just some random online thing.
No.
The possibility of coordination, maybe, or at least a very targeted, specific pattern of stalking.
Yeah.
It's really hard to ignore that possibility.
Exactly. And while Kline was ultimately convicted for child exploitation, crucially, he was never charged directly in connection with the murders themselves.
Right.
So that leaves these huge, troubling questions unanswered about what his actual role was, if any. Were Allen and Kline connected somehow? Did Kline maybe lure Libby to the bridge, maybe without even knowing the final outcome? It's just a very dark, unresolved piece of this whole puzzle.
It really makes you circle back to Allen, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How did he know to be there right then? And Kline, how did he pick Livy online? Was it, like Garfield seems to hint, two different kinds of evil just converging at that moment?
That's the critical point, I think, the simultaneous presence of these two distinct types of predation. The physical right there on the bridge and the digital, the grooming online, it paints this terrifying picture of the multifaceted dangers young people can face today, often without even realizing the threat.
And then Barfield shifts focus to Richard Allen himself, describing him as the man at the bar. That description is so mundane,
Yeah.
ordinary, and yet it carries such a chilling weight looking back.
It really does, because it just shatters that sort of stereotypical image we might have in our heads of some monster lurking in the shadows. Allen, by all accounts, seemed to be living a pretty typical, unremarkable life.
Suburban life.
Playing pool, laughing with people, leaving tips at the bar. These everyday actions now seem utterly unsettling in hindsight. Every normal moment feels like it could have been a performance, a costume.
And the detail that he apparently frequented the same bar where Abby's mother worked. I mean, that just adds another layer of deeply disturbing proximity.
It truly amplifies the horror, doesn't it? The potential for just casual, everyday interactions between the person later convicted of the murders and the family of one of his victims. It's almost unbearable to think about.
Barfield touches on that awful possibility Abby's mother might have served him a drink, exchanged pleasantries, completely unaware of the darkness he allegedly carried.
It drives home that point so forcefully. The people who do these terrible things often do blend in. They don't always look like the monsters we imagine. They can look and act just like anyone else.
Which makes them harder to spot, harder to stop.
Exactly. Until it's far too late. And Barfield raises this really disturbing thought, something that's probably crossed the minds of people in that community, that maybe Allen's presence in those familiar places wasn't entirely random.
What do you mean?
Perhaps it was a way to exert this subtle, chilling presence, maybe even to observe, to unnerve Abby's mother, a way of establishing some kind of psychological dominance even before the crime itself. It's a horrifying thought.
Now let's talk about the Franks motion and the defense's theory involving Odinists. That was a really unexpected turn in the legal case, wasn't it? Barfield frames it in a really interesting way, as a form of psychological confession through projection.
Yes, that was definitely a curveball. What's particularly interesting, psychologically speaking, is how Allen's defense team tried to shift the blame onto this completely unrelated group.
This theory of a ritual sacrifice by white supremacist Odinists.
Right, supposedly motivated by an interracial relationship involving one of the mothers. It was a startling claim, and while there wasn't much actual evidence presented to back it up.
And Barfield sees this as maybe a form of psychological projection. The idea that Allen might be taking his own inner turmoil, his own unacceptable thoughts, and basically assigning them to someone else. Can you unpack that a bit?
Certainly. So projection, in psychology, it's a defense mechanism. You unconsciously take your own unwanted feelings or motives and attribute them to another person or group. Barfield suggests that Allen, perhaps unable to face his own reasons for such a horrific act, projected those dark impulses onto this external group. He created a narrative that shifted the blame away from himself.
And the irony that Barfield points out, Allen's own daughter being married to a man of Filipino descent, that really underscores this idea, doesn't it?
It does, and the fact that Allen apparently mentioned this to the police, but in this very detached, almost neutral tone, as Barfield notes, it kind of fuels that interpretation.
Right.
So Barfield raises this crucial question: what if Allen's rage wasn't about some abstract ideology, but something much more personal, maybe even more base?
Like humiliation, rejection.
Feelings of humiliation, rejection, maybe a deeply twisted need to exert power, to punish women. Seen that way, the Odinist defense looks less like a genuine search for an alternative killer and more like Allen creating a scapegoat.
A mirror, as Barfield puts it.
Exactly, a mirror to reflect his own internal conflicts outward rather than having to look at them himself.
It's a really unsettling idea that this bizarre defense strategy wasn't about finding truth, but maybe about Allen finding some kind of psychological escape hatch from his own guilt or torment.
Precisely. As Barfield seems to suggest, projection isn't really about finding external truth. It's often about seeking internal comfort, however distorted that might be. And in a case this charged, trying to shift blame like that is incredibly disturbing for the families and the community.
Barfield also spends some time reflecting on what he calls the silence of the mothers, especially Abby's mother. He notes that since Alan's arrest, her public comments have been pretty minimal, particularly when you contrast it with her earlier memory, that unsettling look she recalled from a man in a store.
That silence is incredibly powerful, isn't it? And Barfield stresses that we shouldn't read it as, lack of feeling or wanting to avoid it. It could be a very deliberate choice.
How so?
A choice not to give any more attention, any more oxygen, as he puts it, to the evil that took their daughters. A way to protect themselves, maybe, and to honor Abby and Libby's memory in their own way.
It really makes you wonder what Abby's mother might know or suspect. That memory she shared about the man in the store.
Yeah.
Especially now, knowing about Alan's arrest, it feels incredibly significant, like a missed warning sign maybe.
It does. Barfield suggests, perhaps she did see Alan before, maybe even had some brief, unremarkable interaction. The silence could also just be profound self-preservation.
A way to cope.
Yeah, a way to avoid constantly reliving that unimaginable trauma by talking about it all the time in public. It's maybe a recognition that words just can't hold that kind of experience, can they?
It's a powerful reminder that we need to respect that silence. We don't have a right to demand their thoughts and feelings. Their silence, like you said, it speaks volumes on its own.
Absolutely. Barfield reframes silence not as an absence, but as potentially an act of immense strength, a deeply personal way of navigating grief, and maybe even a quiet form of resistance against the horror.
Another really significant theme that runs through Barfield's reflections is this underlying sense of brokenness. When you look at the family structures, the backgrounds involved, not just Abby and Libby, but Richard Allen too.
This is a really critical layer, I think, in trying to grasp the wider context of this tragedy. Barfield points out, Libby was being raised by her grandparents. Abby's father isn't really mentioned much in the main narrative.
And Alan himself?
Alan himself was adopted by his stepfather. So you see these patterns.
It's not about drawing a straight line like saying this caused that, but Barfield seems to be painting a picture of a community where maybe a certain level of instability or absence in family life might have become almost normalized, maybe less likely to be seen as a major red flag within the community itself.
Exactly. Barfield describes it as a multi-generational, community-wide landscape of quiet brokenness. A place where these kinds of difficult family situations might be so common that they just blend into the background, maybe not always recognized as potential vulnerabilities.
But he emphasizes that people with harmful intentions, predators, they do notice these things, don't they? They're often very skilled at spotting and exploiting those kinds of vulnerabilities.
Precisely. Barfield argues that predators like Alan are often adept at identifying and then exploiting those gaps. Not just physical security gaps, but gaps within fractured families, within communities that might be struggling with various kinds of instability or lack of resources. They seek out vulnerability. They target it.
It's a really sobering thought that the social fabric of a community, if it's weakened over time, perhaps through economic hardship or other stresses, can inadvertently create openings for those with dark intentions.
And that really leads into Barfield's more systemic view, the idea that Delphi, in a way, wasn't just an isolated random tragedy, but maybe a symptom of broader systemic failures.
Failures stacking on broken people, as he puts it.
Yes. He lays out a pretty stark list, doesn't he? The digital world that allows predators to operate, sometimes anonymously.
Roomy online, yeah.
The often slow grinding wheels of the justice system. A culture that sometimes maybe ignores or downplays red flags.
A tendency to look away, perhaps.
Perhaps, and maybe a mental health void, a lack of resources. A world that just isn't seeing the warning signs until it's too late.
It's a really powerful and, frankly, disturbing statement he makes, that the murders in Delphi weren't some kind of unpredictable glitch in the system, but maybe a tragic symptom of the system's weaknesses.
Yes. Barfield poses that very direct, very challenging question. When kids are growing up in environments where these vulnerabilities exist, in digital spaces without enough oversight, in communities under stress, what should we realistically expect? It forces us to look beyond just blaming one individual.
Finally, let's come back to that haunting memory. Barfield recounts the look. Abby's mother remembering seeing a man staring at her daughter in a store, And this was long before Richard Allen's name was ever publicly linked to the case.
That memory is incredibly potent, isn't it? It speaks volumes about parental intuition, that deep, almost primal instinct to sense a threat to your child, even when nothing overt has happened.
And the fact that this look, this feeling, stayed with her, became a stain on memory, as Barfield writes, even before the tragedy. It suggests, like he says, that there might have been countless unspoken warnings leading up to that horrible day.
Exactly. Barfield highlights that evil doesn't always announce itself with, a bang. Sometimes it starts subtly, a lingering look, a feeling of deep unease, planting a seed of fear. And for Abby's mother to have that memory resurface with such chilling clarity after Alan's arrest, it's just a truly gut-wrenching detail.
It really underscores the idea that the darkness didn't just appear out of nowhere on the bridge that day. It had roots going deeper into the community, maybe into interactions that seemed completely harmless at the time.
It emphasizes how critical it is to trust our instincts, doesn't it? To pay attention to those subtle red flags, those feelings that something isn't right. They might seem small in the moment, but they can carry just immense, tragic weight in hindsight.
So when we take a step back and look at it all, this deep dive into K. Brad Barfield's reflections really paints this picture of just profound tragedy. 2 young lives lost, likely at the hands of a man consumed by his own internal chaos, but also happening within this complex background of societal vulnerabilities, systemic weaknesses, and maybe, just maybe, numerous missed warnings.
It leaves you with this heavy feeling, doesn't it, that while there's been a legal outcome, a conviction, it's just not enough. It can't possibly be enough to heal the deep wounds. Not for the families, not for the community. The questions will linger, the what-ifs, and the awareness of what might have been prevented. That sorrow will likely always be there.
So for you, the listener, as you reflect on this deep dive, maybe consider the subtle signs, the indicators of vulnerability or potential danger that might exist, even unseen, in your own community. What unspoken warnings might be present around us? And what responsibility do we all share, really, in trying to create a safer world for young people? How do we move beyond just acknowledging the immense grief of a tragedy like this and actively work towards fostering greater awareness and hopefully meaningful change in our own lives and our own communities?